Well, you used to say you're in a New York frame of mind, and that kind of meant something good, but New York's not looking so good these days. And two small stories that tell the picture of a much larger story. First of all, there's this little video incident that was captured, a young black man walking on the streets of New York City and basically just takes a pop at this 92-year-old white woman and knocks her down. And why did he did it? He did it because he knew he wouldn't have to pay for it. There'd be no price to pay. Of more serious nature, such a thing's imaginable. Three New York police officers were poisoned a few nights ago at a Shake Shack. Apparently somebody put bleach in their drinks. All are expected to survive, but why would you do that? If you are working in a restaurant, ladies and gentlemen, and you put bleach in the drinks for the people who have ordered them because you can see that they're policemen, it's not like somebody walked along and dropped some bleach into the drinks between where they were brought out and when they were delivered. That person worked at the restaurant. Why would somebody be so brazen as to do that? Because they knew that they wouldn't get in any trouble for it. And for all of this, I think we have to thank Bill de Blasio, which really means we have to thank the voters of New York for this. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And this is your right angle on the deterioration of New York. Guys, the whole New York, I don't want to be too hard on New York in terms of the incredible damage that they suffered during the pandemic. But since we're on the subject, so much of that damage from the pandemic was due to the incompetence of Bill de Blasio, his public health officials, and also Governor Andrew Cuomo. But you basically have one catastrophe following another in New York. Steve, let's start with you. The COVID-19 thing, Bill de Blasio was very late in the process, telling me, "Oh, go out, have a good time, a big party here in Chinatown or whatever." And then during the riots, he simply refused to enforce the law. His daughter was arrested for violating peaceful protest, norms, and he seems exceedingly proud of that. We all know what kind of person Bill de Blasio is, Steve, but why do the people who have such there's no inexpensive property in Manhattan, why do those people vote for Bill de Blasio and people like him?
Made them feel good. It's really
you think they're feeling good now?
No, I don't. But maybe some of them do. There's a lot of white guilt out there. Self-flagellation. You don't want to do it yourself, so you hire a guy like Bill de Blasio to screw up your city for you, and that will relieve you of your white guilt for having a nice life in what used to be one of the best-run cities in the country, certainly one of the best-run big cities in the country under Giuliani,
briefly,
and even under Mike Bloomberg. I'll give him some credit there. Wow, if you want to run a business in New York City, you pretty much have to beg your mayor, Wilhelm, for permission to do that and under his terms. If you want to worship, it's the same story. This has been underreported. I've written 2, 3, 4 articles about it now for PJ Media, about Bill de Blasio's war on Orthodox Jews. He's closing down Jewish schools. Worship is canceled. He is allowing playgrounds for kids to open in the parts of the city that supported him, but in the Orthodox-dominated neighborhoods who typically don't support him, they had playgrounds. It's New York City, so they've got big fences and stuff welded shut. On Monday, we had 3 Orthodox Jews just finally show up with bolt cutters out of frustration.
Good for them.
And open up this park. And it won't end. He is a petty dictator. Let's call him what he is. Just because he got elected twice doesn't mean he isn't a petty little tyrant. His enforcement of the COVID-19 restrictions have been capricious as they've been arbitrary. Just awful. Oh, if you're a progressive, you can get a dictionary and look those words up. It's been absolutely horrible the way he's been doing this. However, if you want to riot in the streets, if you want to poison a cop, if you want to knock over a 92-year-old woman, well, that's fine by him. His own daughter's at the protest, and she's young enough. You have to know that de Blasio knew his daughter was going to this thing. He made excuses for her afterwards, which essentially is giving an excuse to all the violent rioters, not the peaceful protesters, but to the violent rioters, because that's what she was taking part in. You have a situation where you have two lawyers, two people who passed the New York bar, engaging in a Molotov cocktail attack on a police cruiser. And do you think they'll get debarred in Bill de Blasio's New York City? Hell no. None of this stuff is going to happen. He has exactly what he wants. Progressives don't create, they destroy. Giuliani saved that city after decades of Democratic mismanagement. Bloomberg kept the machine running, and it only took 6 years of Bill de Blasio to undo that good work. And, you know, H.L. Mencken said that democracy is based on the assumption that the people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. Well, New York, bend over, baby.
Scott, when the motion to defund, like completely defund the police force in Milwaukee passed unanimously. I'm sorry, not Milwaukee, Minneapolis. The total number of houses for sale on the real estate market went up by, I think it was 21% in 24 or 48 hours. So clearly in Minneapolis, the people who voted for these kind of policies and governance are moving. They're going to leave. Hard to imagine leaving New York only because the property there is so fantastically expensive. Do you think that the sight of watching their streets and their rioting and all this other stuff is going to influence New Yorkers to go back and do what they did back in the time of Rudy Giuliani and touch the third subway rail and vote for Republican? Or do you think that they're just so deep now into their own philosophy that they're just going to continue to take the erosion of the city?
I really don't understand New Yorkers well enough. In fact, I'll be honest, I don't understand an urban mindset well enough because having grown up in the country, I mean, you just don't think the same. This is not a racial thing. This is really the difference between living in close proximity with millions of people and traveling on public transit and just, walking down the street, walking to work and things like that. And none of that, I can't really connect with that. I don't get it. I do like the idea of letting cities and states experiment with whatever way they want to do public safety. So I have no problem if the city of Minneapolis wants to try something different, as long as you don't mandate that in whatever city I live in, and as long as I have a voice in how our own community gets governed and how law enforcement is done here. Who knows? Maybe we'll discover some better way to handle things. Clearly, things aren't going very well in some of these core Democratic zones around the country at this point. So, why not try something new? I do know that if people suddenly abandon housing, it means the price of housing goes down, which means that it's a buy signal for a lot of people who have a lot of cash sitting around and want to scoop up some great real estate at low prices. And that will only lead to further degradation of the neighborhoods because the neighborhoods will become more monolithically poor. There will be less diversity as far as economic strata goes. And so you really can't build a good community when you just concentrate it with people from one slice of the income pie. So it's a self-fulfilling cycle that just swirls downward and gets worse and worse. I think that at some point, some people are going to come to their senses and say, okay, let's get some serious proposals on the table. I remember that the big difference when the Constitution was being debated back in 1787 and 88, the big difference between the so-called Federalists and the so-called Anti-Federalists was that the Federalists had a plan. The Anti-Federalists just didn't like it. And guess who won? The people who had the plan. And so if you come into a protest movement and you don't have a plan, then you may burn things and break things and shout at public officials and National Guardsmen for a while. But eventually somebody's going to have to say, what's your plan? Because we want to vote on it, up or down. And if you don't have a plan, then whoever does have a plan is going to win this one. So I'm hoping some of these protesters who really legitimately care about justice understand that they need to have a plan, not only just some utopian vision of how they want things to be, but a plan that can garner public support and that can sustain the life of a city.
I was actually born in New York City. I was born in Manhattan. And when I was a kid, New York was the New York of George Reeves' Superman. I just looked out the window. We lived across the river in New Jersey and just looked out and saw the Empire State Building. We expected to see him flying down there at any time. That New York was a pretty safe place and a pretty good place to live. My dad was a hotel manager. I went up to visit him in New York in 1979. And in 1979, he told me very clearly that I was not to cross a certain street after sunset, and that my little walk through Times Square resulted in nothing but being hit on by prostitutes, junkies, and people handing live sex show pamphlets out to, 17-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old kids. Here's why New York is important. New York is critically important in the argument about governance because New York is the example. It is the control example. You can say that all of the rest of the major cities in America, which have been run by Democrats for 70, 80, 90, 100, 150 years, in some cases pushing 150 years in Atlanta, you can say that they're hellholes because they're run by Democratic politicians and their policies, but there's no control. There's no control in terms of, what would happen if a Republican did it, except that there is in fact a case where not one city in America, not a city in America, the city in America was run by a Republican for a brief period of time. And New York went from, I don't know what it was, 2,000 murders a year to 350, something, 350, something like that. The subways went from a place of abject terror, which finally was causing citizen militias like the Guardian Angels and Curtis Lee, who was a personal hero of mine, to step up and do the job that the Democratic governance would not do. Rudy Giuliani came in there and basically said, we are going to enforce the law. The broken windows policy that he devised with Bill Braxton was basically very simple. He said, if you can throw a rock and break a window in this neighborhood, or if you can urinate against the side of a building, these are small things, but they are basically a signal that there is no law here. And if you can push a little old woman in the face and knock her down, then there's no law here either. And he decided to enforce the law. And in doing so, Rudy Giuliani saved more black lives than any other politician in the history of that city. So all of a sudden, Times Square is not only safe, it's actually pleasant and fun. And then people take it for granted, and back we go into the virtue signaling, back we go into the default state of, oh, well, everything's fine, so we have nothing to worry about. New York, you don't have an excuse. You could say that maybe Minneapolis has an excuse, but you don't. You are filled with people who remember what good governance was like. And when Rudy Giuliani was watching these riots going through New York City and smashing these stores, expensive stores, as well as other people's neighborhoods and their properties, which is their lives, Rudy Giuliani sat there aghast. I watched him on Fox watching this thing live. He says, when we had a problem with riots, we allowed people to protest. And when somebody threw a rock at a police car, we arrested them. And when the second person did it, we arrested them. When the third person did it, we arrested them too. And there was no fourth person. And it is such an indication of how diseased progressivism is that the idea of enforcing the law and saving the lives of black people and reducing the murder rate is somehow considered evil and racist. That's how out of touch with the actual reality the progressives that have taken over New York really are. So, New York, this is what you voted for. This is the governor you voted for. This is the mayor you voted for. And if you have Hasidic Jews, who I would consider to be fairly law-abiding citizens, going after padlocks with bolt cutters, and you have young New Yorkers, who I wouldn't exactly call Trump troops, basically going to bars and nightclubs and standing out there saying, we've had enough of this. You told us we had to stay in because it's a pandemic. And then the next thing you know, I see 17,000 people not wearing masks marching down the street, and you're telling me it's okay. Now you're going to cite me for serving drinks? Nah. Make up your mind, Manhattan. You're an island, and you are the only example of the actual difference between the governance of a major city based on Republican and Democratic policies. And it's clear as hell to me. It should be as clear as hell to you, too. That's this edition of Right Angle, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com. Love to have you join the team and continue to put content like this out for everybody. So until next week, I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green, Scott Ott. This is your Right Angle. We'll see you next time.